Throughout our lives, we've heard many powerful speeches, whether these speeches were given in the past and we now get to listen to them, or we hear them live today. We can understand how speeches carry a certain power that can move the masses. This can be easily seen in Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II. Not many people had quite the influence as he did. Winston was able to move an entire country with just his words. For you who do not know much about Winston, today, my final informative speech, I will be telling you all about him, how he grew up, his life, and how he grew to become such a successful leader and speaker. Winston Churchill was born on November 30th in 1874. His parents were Lord Randolph Henry Spencer Churchill, a conservative politician, and his mother was Jenny Jerome, daughter of a New York stockbroker. Churchill loved his parents, but they were not involved very much in his life. As a result, he looked up to them and strived to be like them. This is where he started to obtain his vision to become a popular figure in Britain's government. His nanny, Mrs. Everest, was responsible for raising Winston and his close brother Jack. Winston went to different boarding schools in Ascot and Brighton before going to Harrow in his teens. Winston was not a good student. He got punished frequently, and he was quite rebellious and would lose interest in his studies easily. So, Winston only did well in the courses that actually interested him. He loved history, horseback riding, swimming, fencing, and most physical courses like PE that we have today. He disliked the sciences and mathematics. At age 17, he won the public school's fencing championship, foreshadowing his future career as a fighting man. At the same time, he showed great passion for language and poetry classes. So one would think, well, obviously, his love for foreign language and poetry classes helped fuel the title of Master Orator and one of the greatest speakers the world has ever known. But you're wrong. Winston maintained a love for these courses, but struggled mightily, as he was born with a lisp and struggled with his speech, especially his S's. So how does one who got picked on for his lisp and monotone voice become that Master Orator? Practice. Winston Churchill was not gifted in the speech department, but understood from a young age how important it was. With his father, he used to practice his S's by reciting the phrase, "The Spanish ships I cannot see, for they are not in sight." He used to sit there and practice that phrase religiously. This helped Churchill by the time he got to Harrow. He was able to memorize and recite 1,200 lines of the Lays of Ancient Rome, a long poem by Macaulay, winning a school prize. But it was not enough, as he and his parents both agreed to send him to military school, where he showed his brightest future. He was accepted into the Royal Military College, located in Sandhurst, on his third attempt on the entrance exam. As a result of his poor test score, he was not able to join the artillery, engineers, or infantry, and instead joined the cavalry, where he excelled and started building credibility. This is where we see Winston obtain a true vision for himself, and where he starts to use public speaking as a major tool. In one of his essays, in 1897, at age 23, he writes, quote, "Of all the talents bestowed upon men, none is so precious as the gift of oratory. He who enjoys it wields a power more durable than that of a king." End quote. Beginning in the 1900s, we see Winston start making his vision a reality. In 1900, he was elected into Parliament at age 26. While serving in Parliament, he was required to stand up and give many speeches. One of his most memorable speeches was when he was 29 in 1903. He was still considered a new member of Parliament and had to give a speech in the House of Commons. He managed a few words and froze for 3 whole minutes straight. He returned to his seat in despair and was said to have covered his head with his hands in defeat. Afterwards, Churchill wrote and vowed to never let that happen again. After his failed speech, he went on to be a colonial secretary of Great Britain in 1905, president of the Board of Trade in 1908. In 1911, Winston was promoted to the First Lord of Admiralty of the British Navy, along with being a battalion commander. This lasted into World War I until 1917, where he was then given the title of the Minister of Munitions. Along the way, Churchill was noted for his way with motivating his men. He was noted to use words to better himself, his country, and the people around him. He continued to climb the ranks of the British government, and in 1919 became the Secretary of State for Air and War. In 1921, he was the Colonial Secretary of the Middle East. With World War II breaking out, Churchill was brought back to lead once again in 1939. He was named First Lord of Admiralty of the Norwegian Offensive. 1 year later, he completed and reached a major point in his vision for himself when he was nominated Prime Minister in 1940. Winston Churchill will forever be remembered as the Prime Minister whose speeches rallied a nation. At the time of him becoming Prime Minister, France, Britain's ally, just got invaded by Germany. The Nazis' onslaught looked unavoidable for Britain, and the public's morale was at an all-time low. Britain's doom looked unavoidable, and then, on May 13, 1940, 3 days after the invasion of France and his acceptance of Prime Minister, Winston Churchill gave his first speech as Prime Minister in the House of Commons, the same spot he froze all those years ago. His speech was named Blood, Toil, Tears, and Sweat. Through his speech, he poured out his passion for his country. One of his most famous lines was, quote, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat," end quote. According to Andrew Roberts, author of a history of World War II called The Storm of War, quote, "Churchill managed to combine the most magnificent use of English, usually short words, Anglo-Saxon words, and Shakespearean words, and also this incredibly powerful delivery, and he did it in a time when the world was in such peril from Nazism that every word mattered," end quote. His speech was so popular and moving, they aired his speech a few days later, and will record and air every speech from that moment on. Another popular quote from one of his speeches is, quote, "You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival." With his speeches, Churchill sparked a fire in the hearts of his people, helping them get through the intense bombings and long war ahead of them. How can one man make such a great change in such a little amount of time and to such a great extent? One word: preparation. He was known to spend an hour on every minute of his speech he gave. His speeches looked more like a compilation of poems. He would mark all over the page, leaving notes and spaces reminding him when and where to pause, or when and where to exert energy to gain momentum and let the people think. Churchill used a vast vocabulary. He would use words that all people would understand or know, whether from school or common books and reads. But he would also mix in Anglo-Saxon words, bringing the roots of Britain into his speech. Then he would use Shakespearean words to provide the grace and elegance needed in his speeches. Winston also used powerfully charged words that struck at people's hearts, as seen in the blood, toil, tears, and sweat. He would also use repetition to drive home points and ingrain his main points in people's minds, as seen in his victory speech. By mastering these few things, and after hundreds of hours of preparation, Winston Churchill was able to use his voice as a weapon the country of Britain could lean on. He became that master orator, and one of the world's best speakers of all time through hard work and immense preparation, not natural talent. Winston Churchill continued to serve his country after World War II. He gave his famous speech in Zurich, pushing European leaders to unite as one. He inspired the European Common Market and the European Union. He is known as the Father of Europe. Winston was knighted into the Order of Garter, the highest order of chivalry in the United Kingdom, in 1953. And in 1963, he was the first of 8 people to become an honorary citizen of the United States. Then, in 2002, Winston Churchill was voted the greatest UK citizen of all time in a BBC poll with over 1 million voters. We see his fingerprints all over history and can remember him as one of the greatest speakers and writers of all time. Often forgotten, Winston Churchill has published 72 volumes in his name and won the Nobel Peace Prize of Literature in 1953 after being nominated in 1946, 48, 49, and 50. So not only was he a prestigious speaker, but a great writer as well. Thank you all for listening. World War II has always been a fascination of mine, and as I have loved to pick the minds of the great leaders of the past, Winston Churchill being one of them. It was my pleasure informing you all on his life and how he influenced the world with his voice. Thank you.